The Syrian government most certainly appears to not only be expanding but also intensifying its military campaign, trying to use brute force, it would seem, to silence these voices of dissent. The most recent round of violence has forced even the Arab world to make a statement, which up until now had largely remained silent. According to eyewitnesses, residents of Deir ez-Zor, they told CNN that the tanks and bulldozers rolled in the early hours of the morning. One resident that CNN spoke to was in tears as he talked about snipers being positioned on rooftops, tanks shelling residential areas indiscriminately, homes being raided, families forced to flee. Deir ez-Zor, along with Hama, had been the scene of some of the largest demonstrations to take place in the country, and it is also a fairly significant area. The region is oil rich, but also among the country's poorest, and it is also extremely tribal, right up against the border with Iraq. In fact, it was one of the main smuggling routes for foreign fighters and weapons to support the insurgency in Iraq when it was at its peak. And tribal leaders had already vowed to fight back in the face of a military onslaught, saying that 5 months of negotiations with this government, a murderous government they called it, had failed. In Hama, the military siege there still continues, and at least 50 people were killed in a single attack by the Syrian military, it would seem, when, according to 2 eyewitnesses, a tank fired at a hospital. We also heard from an activist that 8 premature babies had died. They were relying on incubators to stay alive, and the power being cut since Wednesday, that appears to have had its impact. Residents there saying that they continue to hear the sounds of shelling and of gunfire. And in the province of Homs, yet another military onslaught there as well. And we also heard reports of Syrian security forces continuing to fire on demonstrators and even on a funeral. As we were saying, the Arab world finally speaking out about what is taking place. The Arab League issuing a statement saying that Syria must stop immediately all acts of violence and security campaigns. And the Gulf Cooperation Council added that Syria needed to put an end to the bloodshed. Not exactly the harshest of words, but still a very significant move, one that throws Syria into even greater isolation. But it seems that the more isolated Syria becomes, the more brutal and ruthless the government is. Arwa Damon, CNN, Beirut.